welcome back to the Lamppost Listener. My name is Daniel.
I'm Phil.
And this is a podcast where we journey chapter by chapter through C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia. This is chapter 13 of The Horse and His Boy, The Fight at Anvard.
I finally figured it out.
What?
This is where Anvard and Upvard comes from.
You already made that joke in the last episode.
Did I really?
Yeah.
We don't have any evidence of it.
That was actually at the very end. So if anyone is ever binging these, they just heard you make this joke. Like, I know that in reality we've recorded these weeks and weeks apart, but it's going to sound like you just made that joke.
Let's do it again.
No. I'm keeping it
seriously,
in.
let's do it again. I have a different one.
All right, this is chapter 13 of The Horse and His Boy, The Fight at Anvard. I think I just pronounced it differently that time. Wait a second.
Well, yeah, we're actually reading from the German version this time. This is the Anvard version.
Oh, goodness. Well, we have chapter 13 today, a really unique chapter. I mean, we say that a lot, but this is actually a chapter unlike anything we've ever seen before. This is a chapter where there's really only one major event that takes place, and we get a shift in perspective and point of view in the middle of the chapter, which I don't think has ever happened before.
Yeah.
We're right in the middle of a chapter. Lewis is like, hey, we're going to leave this scene. We're going to go somewhere else.
And watch it from they watch it in a muted way from a distance.
It's a choice. It is a choice by C.S. Lewis here, who we love.
One of the more controversial things that he's done. Controversial things that he's done.
But we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about it here. Is there anything you want to chat with before we go ahead and just jump into our chapter summary?
I feel like our overarching theme for this chapter is this is the scene that happens in every superhero movie, 40 minutes from the end, the start of the battle. Like, this is what we've all been working up toward. And we get a whole chapter of fighting, and it matches the blueprint.
All right, well, it is an odd chapter, so I have the chapter summary. Are you ready, Phil?
I'm ready.
There is a battle at Anvard.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Super short summary. I hope your fingers aren't cramping up from all that typing.
That's my chapter summary. I have a little bit of a longer one, if you like. I've never done this before. But
let's go ahead and hear that one, and then we can trim it out later if it's not good.
If it makes the episode too long. Here, take two. The Archenlanders, aided by the Narnians, engage in a bloody battle with the Calormans at Anvard. Shasta is helpless, and most of the battle is narrated by the hermit of the Southern March through a magic viewing pool. The Calormans are eventually defeated, and Rapidash is taken captive.
Wow, that was slightly longer.
It was a little bit longer, and this was not me just going, hey, we're at the end of the season, who cares anymore? That's not it at all. Yeah. But I actually thought it'd be fun to kind of talk about just and use this opportunity
to write a haiku.
To acknowledge this was more than 17 syllables.
Some pretty fast math.
5 + 5 + 7 was pretty fast math.
It was.
A lot of why I wanted to actually write a short one here was not just to be goofy and silly here on the show, but was actually to really actually highlight how little like events actually take place. There are a lot of details given, and there's a little bit of character development as well. But really, it's like this battle takes place. I mean, this chapter is. I don't know how long the battle actually takes, but this is a chapter that covers a very short period of time. And yet it's not necessarily a short chapter when it comes to the actual prose that Lewis is using here.
But if you go beat by beat in terms of what takes place in the story itself, it really is that short.
All right. Well, I think now jumping into this chapter, Phil, how does it start off?
With the word "by."
Thank you so much. So
if you're going to write such a short summary, I'm going to really draw this part out.
Oh, goodness.
It begins with a description of Corin riding to battle with everybody else, and specifically right where the giants are. The giants are right in front of him. He's right behind them. Lucy and Edmund are a little bit of a distance away from Shasta himself.
Yeah.
Because they don't know that Corrin and Shasta are there. They just know that they're not around.
Yes.
And that's enough for them at that point.
Yeah, it's there's this is funny here to see a little bit of adult Lucy and Edmund. Lucy, who says, "Where is his goosecap highness?" And Edmund replies like, he's not in the front, and like, that's all I need to know.
Yep. Let's just leave it alone.
I don't take this as Lucy and Edmund being mean or ugly towards someone else, but instead very focused on the task at hand. And like, we don't want this 12-year-old, or I think we said they were 14, these 14-year-old kids to get in the way of something that's really important.
Mm-hmm.
They very much have kind of their priorities in the correct order, and being like, look, we got to get this silly little kid out of here, teenager out of here, so that we can actually win this battle and save people's lives.
Right. They also quickly explain why Queen Susan is not there.
Yeah, she's not there.
You know what it comes across as?
What does it come across as?
It comes across as explaining where Tony Stark's girlfriend is when they didn't get Gwyneth Paltrow to sign on for a movie. Like, oh, they're not doing so hot. Like
I'm actually legitimately not sure what you're talking about.
Whenever they,
I know. I'm just like, I don't know when they actually did that.
Oh, like which part? I thought, which one was that?
There
I think it's like any Avengers movie.
Okay.
They're like, where is Gwyneth Paltrow? And they just explain it as like, oh, like she's running the company, or things aren't going so great.
Pay her or something? Is that kind of the thought process behind it?
Yeah, she's a bigger name, more expensive, and they don't.
So they have to.
Or maybe she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't even know what she's in. Like, you remember when she found out she was in Spider-Man, or she's in Captain America or something?
I think you told me this. That she was like,
No,
I didn't know.
You told me this.
Oh, I told you this.
Yeah, she's on a cooking show.
Yes, I do remember this. Okay, yeah. So,
and she corrects him. She's like, "No, I wasn't in that one."
They're like, "Oh, yes, no, you were." She's like, "Oh, was that the movie?"
She was like, "I was in Spider-Man." Like, yeah.
I do remember that now. Yeah. Okay, I remember now. But yeah, so we learned that Queen Susan is not there, that she could hold a bow and arrow, but she is not there to fight today. Instead, Lucy is the one that is there.
Yeah, which is a nice way to remind us that Lucy is not the Lucy that we have read about in earlier books. She's not the child. She is this older, more experienced person.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really all we mostly see of Edmund and Lucy. And again, one of the fears that I brought up just as a reader personally, when the Narnians that we know and love showed up in chapter 4 earlier in this book, was like, oh, I really hope they don't overshadow our protagonists in this story. And they really haven't. It is fun to see them in these little scenes, and it's very clear that the perspective that we're getting of Shasta in this battle is not the real heart of the battle. Edmund's really going to go up against Rapidash later on, and we get a little bit of description of that. Yeah. But for the most part, like, the most important parts of the battle are not seen by us as readers, or not heard by us as readers.
Yeah, agreed.
There's a really great paragraph comes right after we hear about Queen Susan that I'd like to read, Phil, as Shasta is kind of looking around at this scene, that the place he just came from, because he's like doubling back, right? He just left Arkenland, and he got to Narnia, and now he's leaving Narnia, going back into Arkenland.
Yeah, along the same route.
The exact same route. And here's what C.S. Lewis writes. The hillside path which they were following became narrower all the time, and the drop on their right hand became steeper. At last they were going in single file along the edge of the precipice, and Shasta shuddered to think that he had done the same last night without knowing it. But of course, he thought, I was quite safe. This is why the lion kept on my left. He was between me and the edge all the time.
I'm glad you brought this up. To me, this reminds me of, you go through something, and then later, when you're able to view it maybe a little bit more detached, like in a more detached way, you're able to see, oh, that was really close. I imagine it would be like, getting in some dangerous situation, and then watching the video from a security cam later, like realizing how close you were to something going really bad. Not that that happens a lot, but that's the thing that comes to mind.
No, I think that's a good point. I am really excited to return to this book after we have finished it, because this is the kind of thing that in any other season, I would have found this line and be like, let me go grab the 7 or 8 other books I have by people a lot smarter than me to help me kind of connect some of the dots here, because I've brought up a couple of times that it's Aslan's providence and his like divine providence here has been this kind of recurring theme that I've noticed as a reader. But I'm reading these one chapter at a time over the course of, like, I think the last time we recorded was a couple of weeks ago. Mm-hmm. So, it's not like I'm reading them close to one another and I'm like, okay, what happened in other times? But I know that there's been a couple of other instances throughout this book where it's been clear that Aslan is in control. Like, if you've read other Narnia books, even if Shasta doesn't know, you realize that. But we're finally seeing for the first time Shasta have the revelation that, oh, wow, now that he's already had that conversation, I guess this would be a second revelation, because the first time was actually Aslan just straight up telling him, hey, that was me. Like, I did all those things.
Right.
This is the first time on his own now, with Aslan no longer with him, where he's starting to realize, like, it's not like that was the pinnacle and climax of the relationship and it's all downhill from there, right? Like, he's now on his journey of faith here. And so Shasta, who has been told by Aslan just directly from the lion's mouth, I did these things for you, is now starting to realize, oh, Aslan is going to continue to do those things. He's going to continue, right, having that presence in my life, even in ways that I might not be able to see him. And so it makes me really excited, one, to go look at some of those wonderful authors that I'll be able to bring back into the conversation in The Magician's Nephew. But it also makes me excited just to reread this story in a much hopefully not take, it's December right now for us. Mm-hmm. And we started recording these in April.
Right.
Yeah. So I'm very excited to not take almost a whole year to read 120 pages.
Right.
So, because I do think that some of those themes will jump out at me a little bit more, but I did find this to be a really beautiful reminder, and a reminder that us as readers need to remember all along as well.
Yeah. On that note, now that I have something that records my reading speed and tells me how much longer it'll take me to finish the book, I realize that these are not as long as I kind of thought. I think that when you look at the whole volume, it seems like a ton of prose, and it is. And it's over 1,000 pages if you put it all together in one volume, or close to 1,000 pages. But these are not super long books. If we really had to, we could read the entire thing in one sitting.
I think, well, even to take a step back to view this through the lens of literary criticism, even the prose of Lewis is still complex. He is not afraid to really draw a sentence out, even in children's literature. When I do The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with my students, it's some of these sentences wait, you can write a sentence that long? And I'm like, yeah, Lewis really has full control over the English language. Actually, he came up twice in my class today. The first time was with my 6th grade composition class. So we use this great classical curriculum called the Institute for Excellence in Writing. A lot of classical schools use this. It's by a guy named Andrew Poudois, is kind of the main guy who runs this organization or started it. And my students were writing these essays today on Vikings. They're writing on Vikings because it lines up with their medieval history they're also learning. And one of my students was they were manipulating some of the sentences. They had to include a because clause as what we call a dress up. And they took this, I don't remember the actual sentence was. I had a student that showed me where it was Vikings, attacked European lands further south of Scandinavia because they wanted land, or because they needed more fertile soil. I think that was the word they used, because fertile was their quality adjective. Mm-hmm. But then the student, she took that sentence and she flipped the because clause around. She's like, wait, so I can actually say because they wanted fertile soil with a comma, the Vikings traveled further south. Mm. And it was this, it's 11, 12-year-old student who's like, I'm in control of these words on the page. And it was like, yes. I said, this is what I talk about when this student read Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe with me last year. So this is what we're talking about when we look at great authors. This student's also currently reading Charles Dickens, and so we're looking these are what we look at Dickens or Lewis. These are authors that are manipulating words in almost magical ways, and it's exciting when you get to be one that does that. And the student was very happy that they were, being told they were somewhat like C.S. Lewis.
It's a great move.
Lewis though also came up. This is unrelated, but my fifth graders, because we do it at Christmas time, we're reading The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe together. And today was chapter 15. So yesterday we killed off Aslan. About half the class is familiar enough with the story that they're like, I'm not gonna say anything. But like half the class is like, that what?
Yeah.
That what's gonna happen? And had some really great students, kind of sharing. Well, I think that even though Aslan's dead, Peter and Edmund are going to finally, we're writing good endings to a story. I think Peter and Edmund are going to unite, and they're going to finally come back together, and Aslan's death is what's going to reunite the four siblings. We're like, okay.
Wow.
But then when Aslan came back today, there were 3 kids that clapped.
Oh, wow.
Which I've never had happen during a reading of The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe before.
Must have been engrossed.
They just clapped, and I loved it. I was like, it was just funny to see that excitement in some of my students, just because that's why we do this podcast. That's
right.
What Lewis is all about here. It's I'll definitely hopefully keep that memory for many years to come of Aslan standing up in front of the broken stone table and like 3 kids just clapping.
Gosh, I can picture that too.
Yeah.
That's so fun.
It was fun.
You must have been doing a good job reading that story too.
Well, my students were reading it. I wasn't reading that one.
They were reading it?
They were reading it out loud.
Wow.
Yeah. So we're getting a little off topic there, just sharing a little bit about Lewis in my work life, I guess. But going back here, we just finished talking about Shasta's, realization that, oh my goodness, Aslan was really keeping me safe this whole time, and I didn't even realize it. Mm-hmm. But what happens from there? Because we're going to go from this feeling of safety to a feeling of much greater danger.
Well, they walk and they halt and they spread out in a line. They start getting ready. There are a lot of animals. They describe the horrid, heavy spiked boots that the giants are putting on, and the archers everybody's getting ready and testing their bow. And then they see that a group has a battering ram, and they made this battering ram by felling a tree and then carrying it in, which is just such a great way to do that. They don't have to carry a tree around the whole time.
Yeah. It's just...
But I can't help but picture stuff from the Lord of the Rings movies when I'm reading things like this. So I'm picturing a very dark area, and they're tearing down a tree and stuff.
Well, speaking of dark things here, this line right before we noticed that, where Corin looks up and he kind of points out that to Shasta that there's these eagles, these birds overhead. And Corin says they know we're preparing a feed for them. They smell battle. That is one of the most gruesome lines that Lewis has given us in the Chronicles of Narnia here. I was like, that is so troubling right before this battle. And you got it. There's a 1-sentence paragraph right after that. Shasta didn't like this at all, and it's
realizes what he's gotten into.
Yeah, it was funny when we talk about it here, but it very much when you're reading alone, to me it doesn't come across as funny. It comes across as absolutely terrifying, and that's good to see actually as a reader, because Shasta was being very arrogant in the last chapter. Like, I'm gonna go do this stuff. I'm gonna go. He's kind of talked into it by Corin. Him and Corin are feeling pretty good about themselves. And then so him actually now being at the edge of this battle is like, oh, actually, this could be a terrible mistake.
Right. Maybe there's a reason I wasn't allowed here.
Yeah, exactly. But we notice at the same time that this battering ram is going against the castle doors, that also there's this very long paragraph, which I won't read here, where the giants are putting on these other shoes they're going to use that are like spiked boots. We have people, putting clubs on their shoulders, testing the strings of their bows, tightening girths, putting on helmets, drawing swords. I guess I kind of am reading it. Throwing cloaks to the ground, all of these different things, and you really get the sense that battle is coming. And I think so far, this is actually the first real battle we've seen described in this kind of detail. We don't really get anything more than one paragraph in Wardrobe. Mm-hmm. Caspian has the battle at the very end, but it's much faster.
Yeah, I feel like everything is much faster with less description, for sure. This goes into quite a bit of detail, quite a bit of build-up too. And it's an interesting device. I feel like we we are really having the scene set, but we're also feeling that anticipation, knowing what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
And at this point, most people are not reading this book first. Some people do, but most people are not. You're familiar with what a Narnia battle might be like, and you're ready for that. But this puts a block and kind of slowly leads you into it. And you can feel the tension in the air, from the eagles up above to the fact that you're not supposed to be there with Shasta and Corin. You just kind of feel that pressure mounting.
Yeah. Well, you know what I think the greatest tension is let's think back to the books we read. There's no big battle in Silver Chair. There's not a big battle in Dawn Treader. There are in Caspian and in Wardrobe, even if they're not described a lot. But in both of those battles that we see, in Wardrobe and in Caspian, Aslan is present or is soon to be present. Aslan has returned and is on the side of the Narnians. In Wardrobe, even though the battle starts before them, we actually, in the book, I know the movie's much different, but in the book, we really only get the perspective of the battle once Aslan and the girls and all the statues have arrived.
Oh yeah, we're dropped into the battle.
And so like the battle shows up, he eats the witch, and then we move on.
Yeah.
In Caspian, Aslan brings the trees in, right? And they fight this battle, and we have the river god as well too. All of that still is very much, there's not as much tension, and I don't think there's supposed to be a ton of tension here because you have Aslan on your side. If you have the great lion, there isn't. The battle's already been won. If we think of this as a supposal for the Christian faith, the victory has been won. Doesn't mean the battle's actually over yet, and there are going to be losses, there are going to be difficulties, but we know what the final end story will be.
Right.
In this battle, though, Aslan is not on the side of the Narnians. He is nowhere to be found. Yes, he has spoken to Shasta recently, but as far as we know, he has not spoken to Edmund or Lucy or appeared to any of the other Narnians. And so, yes, they're going into battle carrying the banner of Aslan, but he is not literally there in physical form fighting alongside them. So the tension is greater because he's not there. Because it isn't this, they're easily going to win. They have the lion on their side. And I think Lewis does a great job in reminding us, and obviously they do go on to win this battle, and I think we could arguably say it is because of Aslan's divine providence here, but it's not because of his physical presence. And that's a big difference in this kind of battle that we haven't seen before.
Right. And it almost requires faith on the part of the people participating in the battle because he's not physically there. You have to trust that things are going to work out here.
Absolutely. And what's difficult is we don't get to see inside of Edmund's head at all. There is we're going to talk about in a minute, there is the perspective shift from Shasta then to the Hermit of the Southern March, but we have no idea what's going on in Edmund or Lucy's head at this point.
Right.
You know? So I guess we got to move on now. We've got to get to the battle actually beginning. And there is some good words shared about the Calormans and the way that they are wonderfully trained. As the Narnians are now arriving at the battle, they're getting ready. They're on their horses. Those who are on horses, or they send out the cats as well too. Some of the other fast animals. They're going out. They're going to meet the Calormans, and the Calormans, who are mostly on foot because they're trying to knock the door down, very quickly get back on their horses and meet them. And it's as these two lines go crashing into each other that Shasta, he does kind of decide, hey, I've got to do this. It's now or never. But he's knocked off his horse very quickly. And Lewis even decides, you know what, we're not going to do this.
Yeah, and he says the best way would be to tell it from this other perspective.
Do you want to read that paragraph? I think it is an enjoyable read here.
Sure. Right after someone else's armor hits his knuckles.
Yeah.
But it is no use trying to describe the battle from Shasta's point of view. He understood too little of the fight in general, and even of his own part in it. The best way I can tell you what really happened is to take you some miles away to where the Hermit of the Southern March sat gazing into the smooth pool beneath the spreading tree, with Bree and Hwyn and Erebus beside him. For it was in this pool that the hermit looked when he wanted to know what was going on in the world outside the green walls of his hermitage. There, as in a mirror, he could see, at certain times, what was going on in the streets of cities far farther south than Tashbaan, or what ships were putting into Redhaven in the remote Seven Isles, or what robbers or wild beasts stirred in the great western forest between Lantern Waste and Telmar. And I'll stop there just because that paragraph goes on for quite a while.
Yeah, I do see that. There are a lot of lengthy paragraphs moving forward, especially as we get into the hermit's long narration of the battle. But we're not there yet. So
and the style works. It's just we're not going to read the entire chapter for you.
Yeah.
You have to go buy the book for $2.
I think it is like literally $2.99 on the Kindle.
Yeah.
So this is so interesting. It's not that we haven't had perspective shifts before. We have, even in this own book, we've gone back to Erebus and to Shasta. We have not done it in the middle of a chapter and had the narrator turn to us and be like, all right, we're gonna switch this up on you. Right? And this is interesting. I go in a very Narnian way. We have no idea how this magic works. No idea. Didn't know this thing existed. But we've got some kind of magic pool where it seems as if the hermit cannot hear but only see.
Yeah.
Right?
Seems like a very early version of Twitch.
And but also only at certain times. So
right.
Is he in control of it? Does it just randomly turn on? Does he have any control of what he sees?
Does he have a streaming schedule?
All of these things are unknown to us, and they never will be known, and that's why we love the Chronicles of Narnia. Well, the hermit, as he's watching this battle, he begins to describe it, and we hear a lot of really short, choppy sentences sharing the exact things that he's seeing. And what's interesting is the hermit is even kind of giving us some of his commentary on it. So he is both in the sports world where you have kind of the play-by-play and the color commentary. Mm-hmm. He's doing both. So he's like, here's what's happening. Let me tell you what that means. Here's another thing that's happening. This is what that means.
And it's little details that they do help, but they're funny details. He notices that one of the eagles is one of the oldest of all eagles.
Sure. Yep.
He counts the number of eagles. Whenever you start counting, you're in for some funny things in terms of commentary. Oh, there are 11 players on the field versus another 11 players.
And you
Jim,
11 players, that's what they say is the right amount of players to have on that field.
If you have less than that, you don't have enough. And if you have more than that, it's a violation.
I've been watching so much college football the last 2 weeks, and it gets to a point where you're just like, I'm not... There are really great commentators out there, but I've been also watching a couple FCS stuff on ESPN Plus, which is
the Frisbee College series.
No, like the champion, not bowl stuff. Yeah. And because we're not quite there yet, but watching some of the college playoffs with the non-FBS teams, and these people, some of them are really good, and others of them, I just some of the commentary is I am not a super sportsy guy. I would not be able to go up there and talk about a lot of these things. But I'm like, oh, wait, I could do that. A couple of things some of y'all are saying is I think I am also capable of being oh, it is now 4th down, and that is not good for this team. I'm like, oh, I knew that. I knew that was bad.
Right. Yeah. Maybe that should be one of our Patreon goals. If we hit a certain amount, we will provide sports-like commentary to one of the fight scenes.
One of my, I don't think it's a podcast that's around anymore, but one of the funniest podcasts I've ever listened to is by 2 comedians. I don't know either of their names, and I'll have to I'll drop a link maybe in the episode description if I can find it. But it's Matt Gorley is one guy, and he is actually the producer of Conan O'Brien's podcast, and he does it with another guy, Mark McConville. I think they both were in this comedy group called Super Ego, and it is basketball commentary of their wives' rec basketball league in LA.
Oh, wow.
So they would go to these games, sit in the stands with microphones, and the name of the women's basketball team is the Pistol Shrimps. So it was called the Pistol Shrimps Radio. I don't know if it's still on. I haven't listened in years and years. But when I was I don't know, about 5 or 6 years ago, it's just the goofiest thing because at no point do they make any acknowledgement of this being a relatively silly thing to that they're
they take it seriously the whole time.
Basketball league,
Yeah.
But they're very serious about it. I mean, they're goofy, but they don't, it's really deadpan and it's really funny. So I do think there's some language in it as far as I remember. So just as a reminder, because I know our show's not like that, obviously, but anyone is going to go check it out, just be aware. I don't know that it is kid friendly. But yeah, it's that's what we will do. You and I will do that. Your wife is a big soccer player.
Yeah.
Is she doing any rec stuff right now?
Not right now, no.
The next time she does, we'll do that for a dancing lot. No one wants that. But getting back to the text here, this really does happen, like sports commentary here. Here's what the hermit says. He says, "Oh, they've felled and lopped a great tree, and they are now coming out of the woods carrying it as a ram." So there's your little play-by-play. And then here's your commentary. "They have learned something from the failure of last night's assault. He," meaning Rabadash, "would have been wiser if he had set his men to making ladders. But it takes too long, and he is impatient. Fool that he is." So you get a little bit of like, here's what's happening. Here's how I feel about it.
Yeah.
And this is the kind of thing that the first time I read this, I wasn't feeling it. Not that this is about how I feel about the text, but
it's honestly how you felt.
I was just like, oh, man, this is not what I necessarily was thinking we were going to get as far as description for the battle. But then the more I spent time with it, I just thought, what a great, interesting way to have the battle be shared with us from a really unique perspective of someone else who's not even there.
Right. And in a way, someone who has enough experience, apparently, to talk about things in this much detail and describe it that way without it being from Shasta's perspective, where he was hit with something, but he didn't know what it was because he had never encountered a catapult before, or whatever it would be. Also, in addition to that, when Shasta gets knocked off his horse and everything goes wrong, we very quickly switch over to this new perspective, and it's a little disorienting, which matches how Shasta must have felt when he fell off the horse. Because we fall off, and then we kind of hear almost as if it happened later. And I feel like it works really well in communicating just the speed and the fury, and also the more delicate, complicated parts of the battle.
As you say that too, it makes me think, and this is not a developed thought at all, because I just thought of it 10 seconds ago. I wonder how Lewis's experiences in World War I, contributed. Obviously, they would have had to contribute in some way, shape, or form to the way that he's depicting this battle. And I wonder if, his own, difficulties and the trauma that he would have experienced as a soldier in his, late teens in the Great War, I wonder if any of that has to do with maybe even taking a step back and giving this perspective. Giving this story from the perspective of someone who's far away and not someone who's actually there in the battle. I don't have anything else past that. I just that's something I want to maybe think more about, just because it is such an interesting choice, and we know that Lewis experienced war. This wasn't a foreign concept to him. It really happened obviously we're not seeing trench warfare here, but like the idea of battle was not something that he was writing about without experience.
Yeah. On that note, I also have noticed in the description of these things, really difficult stuff is happening. A lot of people die in this battle. And the way that it's treated is this complex mix of, it doesn't shy away from the fact that people die and that it's a bloody battle. But it has a lot of elements of kind of stories that kids must imagine for themselves when they're pretending to be in battles, where there's kind of this glory to it and almost some honor to it.
Yeah. But
it feels more like a King Arthur story than a gruesome, realistic depiction of what battle actually is.
And this is such in direct contrast to the stories coming out, like modern, not modern for us, but I'm talking like actually like modern in the literary movement in the middle of the 20th century that are painting. These are people who, rightfully so, they've lived through World War I, and many of them at this point now live through World War II. They view war as just this horrific, horrible thing. So you see the books coming out at this time. People you can go pick up a bookshelf right now. You can go read, right now is in 1950, what is this, 54 when this is being written. And All Quiet on the Western Front is going to tell you that war is the most horrific thing in the world, right? Because it was a horrible thing in World War I. There wasn't glory. There wasn't honor. It was just horror.
And World War I was where that shift happened in terms of the public opinion of war. I think war has always been pretty awful for the people who were affected by it. But World War I started out on horseback and ended with tanks, and there was so much technology that was introduced and used on a large scale during that time that before you would march off to battle, and it was this kind of honor-filled thing. But then in World War I, you have entire groups of people mowed down with machine guns, and that illusion is shattered because the numbers are so much higher, the conflicts are so much deadlier.
And we just see so much more, too. I mean, even when you have photography in the 19th century, I know here in the United States during the Civil War, Matthew Brady is a really, really famous Civil War photographer. But his work is not being viewed on the same mass level that you're getting in World War I. And so you do, I mean, a lot of, we could talk, and Lewis does himself, and this is a great conversation to have at some point, because Lewis, in like The Abolition of Man and in some of his other nonfiction works, and in his intellectual, in his academic life, is also often pushing against modernity, but he's not necessarily condemning every single aspect of it. He takes a much more nuanced approach where he still stands firmly against it and tries to hold up the past in contrast, in juxtaposition to it. But Lewis is not someone I've heard people before say that the Chronicles of Narnia, they kind of glamorize war, or they make it attractive. And I think it's hard, in my opinion, it's hard to read something like this and know Lewis's history and really think that that's what he's doing here. I don't get that sense as a reader. But I do think that he is trying to call back to, I mean, we know Lewis is not a pacifist. He gives a really famous lecture on why he's not a pacifist. But Lewis is trying to call back, like, there is good and evil in this world. And in his belief, there might be times where you are required to fight for that. And so if that is a truth, what does that mean for us? And is there a way that defeating evil can be done in a God-honoring or honorable way? I don't have an answer for that. Yeah. But I think that Lewis's take on warfare is much more complex than just being super, he loved battle, he loved war. I think that's a really, honestly, poor read of Lewis as a human being and as a writer. But I also don't think he's someone who is a complete pacifist either, where he's just saying all war is always bad, no matter what, all the time.
Right. And I think that complexity comes across in this chapter, especially. And this also makes me think of just one of the things that Lewis does well is he appeals to a large number of groups who may have different opinions. And one of the ways he does that is by communicating that complexity of what war is. Mm-hmm. Because I think that if he were to take a stance either way, it would probably alienate some groups. But he also doesn't have that stance, 100% pacifist, 100% like war is what we need to do all the time. But that complexity is really important. And it's communicated here because the conflict is real. The stakes are real. You know, of course, this is a fiction story, but for the characters, this is real. And it comes across that way. It comes across as we need to go and fight these guys who are doing something that is not right, and it's going to affect other people.
As you're talking, I promise I'm also listening to you, but I'm also Googling stuff, and just in searching, one of the beautiful things about being a grad school student is that I have access to so many journal articles. I think I brought this up that I've been doing this, and I just went on my university's library and searched C.S. Lewis and pacifism, and have come up with a lot of interesting things. The one that's really sticking out to me is A Matter of Chivalry, C.S. Lewis's response to pacifism and the just war theory by it looks like someone named Peter Barrett. So, I mean, I have nothing else to offer other than I think I might do a little bit of research after this chapter, and maybe we can talk a little bit more about this in the next chapter as well, because there seems to be a lot. And for anyone who's not familiar, I believe, but I am not 100% sure, but I'm like 95% sure that Why I'm Not a Pacifist is found in The Weight of Glory. I think that's where Walter Hooper actually collected it, is in The Weight of Glory. But I'm sure that if you just search C.S. Lewis pacifist, like PDF or something, it might even be available for free on the internet. Although, obviously, go out and buy the book as well, too, but it might even be on C.S. Lewis's website. They have a couple of the speeches up there as well. But yeah, this is a great conversation to really think about this. and the way that Lewis depicts these battles, because it's such a personal thing for him. It really is. I just thinking about how this man lived through World War I and World War II, and between that there was a depression. He lost his mother to cancer. He's in less than 10 years from now he's gonna lose his own wife to cancer. This was a man who really experienced some really dark and difficult things, and that's just why there's some things where I do I think that people can have their own opinions of Lewis, but why I just we don't take stances on this show, but I do get a little bit frustrated sometimes when I think people view this as simply Lewis just glamorizing war. I think it's much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I agree.
But let's go on to something a little bit less serious. How about more fun? Let's make fun of Shasta in the battle. How's that sound?
Sure.
So I want to read a paragraph because Aravis is going to ask how Shasta's doing, and here is what the hermit says as this battle is continuing to rage in front of them in the pool. So Aravis says, "What about Shasta?" "Oh, the fool!" groaned the hermit. "Poor brave little fool. Oh, he knows nothing about this work. He's making no use at all of his shield. His whole side's exposed. He hasn't the faintest idea what to do with this sword. Oh, he's remembered it now. He's waving it wildly about. Oh, nearly cut his own pony's head off. And he will be in a moment if he's not careful. It's been knocked out of his hand now. It's mere murder, sending a child into battle. He can't live 5 minutes. Oh, duck, you fool. Oh, he's down." "Killed?" asked the three voices breathlessly. "How can I tell?" said the hermit. And we'll stop right there. It's so...
I absolutely love that part. And when I picture that, in my mind, the hermit is played by Billy Crystal. And it's very similar to the...
That's... Get out. No. The hermit's played by Billy Crystal.
Right? From the guy who played the old guy in The Princess Bride?
He's so much more famous than that, Phil.
I don't know. That's what I remember.
I'm not going to do that. If this was Dancing Lawn, I would call
I'm
Anna
trying to
in the
keep
other
it
room
PG.
over here.
I know he's been in a lot of other stuff.
Well, you can... I mean, he's like... I would say he's more famous even like When Harry Met Sally. He's in...
Yeah, but that doesn't have anything to do with these battles or medieval times.
Oh, but that's where you're pulling it from The Princess
Yeah.
Bride.
Right.
Also, you want to be more kid-friendly? Mike Wazowski from Monsters Inc.
Oh, well, there you
That's
go.
Billy Crystal.
Again, not medieval. But yes, I understand that Billy Crystal is not just in The Princess Bride.
Okay.
Heard it here first.
So
just the way that he responds, where they're obviously concerned. They're breathless when they say, "Is he killed?" And he goes, "Well, how can I tell?
Yeah, it's like, I don't know.
All I have is this magic portal that somehow allows me to see things on mute."
So you get this idea that Shasta is really struggling. He is so far out of his league. This is not an easy place for him to be, and he is very, very close to death. And this goes back to this idea that I think we have to believe that Aslan is helping keep him safe at this point, just because so much insanity is happening on the battlefield, and yet Shasta, who has no idea what he's doing, is remaining almost completely out of harm's way and literally coming inches from harm every few seconds.
Right. Yeah, he really is dodging everything at the last second, it feels like.
Yeah, it really is. Yeah, he's also not killing his horse, which is a good thing to do as well.
Yeah.
Well, the hermit continues giving more descriptions. He's talking about who is fighting whom, all these different things, and the battle then is completely finished, and the very last line of this paragraph is that the Calormans are utterly defeated. And it's that exact line that the perspective, without any indication other than just, the beginning of the sentence, but nothing from the narrator himself, goes back to Shasta all of a sudden. We completely leave the hermit. We don't hear anything else from Aravis, Bree, Hwyn, or the hermit for the rest of the chapter. We're just back to Shasta. And how does this chapter end, Phil?
He's looking around. He sees that the only living Calormans he could see were prisoners, and everybody's circling around. There's some cheerful conversation going on, which means that everybody, at least the people who won, are feeling good. And he picks himself up, but then the king comes over and discovers that he's been in the battle the whole time.
Yeah. And let me ask you, I can't remember exactly. Before the king comes over, is that where we see what happens to Rapidash, or is that after this?
It's right after.
So yeah, we can talk about the king then first. How does the king feel about all this?
At first he's upset, And then someone kind of whispers in his ear that maybe that's not the best thing. Like, this isn't the best time to be upset. And then he does a 180-degree about face and gives him a big hug.
Yeah, he gives him a big hug, which Shasta's never felt before, especially given his own past. And so this, to me, like this is the dude's dad. Like, I know this has to be. Because even the way the chapter ends, he's like, hey, does anyone else have any doubts about this? Like, we're definitely going to find out on the next page or two that this is not Aravis. What's his kid's name? This is Shasta's dad.
Right.
I feel very confident at this point. But before we go on, I do want to jump back to what happens here with Rabbadash, because he's made to look like a fool.
Yeah. So Rabbadash gets kicked by a giant and a hole is torn in his shirt, but it's not a fabric shirt. It's his chainmail thing that goes up over his neck and around his head. Has this giant hole in it. And then when he is fighting people off, he takes the higher ground, which we all know from Star Wars Episode 3 is very advantageous, but not always a guaranteed win. And he's raining down blows, and he comes up with a pretty epic line. The bolt of Tash falls from above, and he jumps up to attack Edmund, and he gets stuck on a hook that is sticking out of the wall.
And there's a great Pauline's Baines illustration here, and Rabbadash is just there. Like, he's completely, unable to fight at this point. He's just stuck there on display for everyone to see and laugh at. And Lewis makes a very important point that this is much worse than death for him, being made to look like a fool, looking ridiculous here. And we know that because we know that Rabbadash is extremely shallow. He's very insecure, and so he needs everyone to think extremely highly of him. And this right here is just complete. You see him for who he really is, which is a immature fool. And I don't know if this is the last we'll see of him or not, but if this is the end, I think this actually is a wonderful ending for Rabbadash, because it ends with him not defeated and dead, but defeated and weak. And that's the worst thing, I think, for him.
Yeah. Where death to him almost would have been an honor, but this is humiliation.
Exactly.
And that's something that he fears more than death.
That's a good point. Well, Phil, I think that's a great place for us to end this discussion on Chapter 13. Do you have any more thoughts before I give you my little dilemma?
I don't. I want to hear it.
So then I'm a little intrigued, because it seems like the climax of the book has come and gone, and we have 2 chapters left. And this next chapter, which I can now start looking at because we finished here, is called How Bree Became a Wiser Horse. How Bree became a wiser horse. And I'm a little confused as about where we're going to go from here, because when Bree and Aravis are multiple days away, travel-wise, I believe, from Shasta, or at least 1 day away, so they're going to have to all meet back up, I assume. But maybe this whole chapter is just focused on those other 3. That's going to be my first little thing, as I think this whole next chapter is going to be Bree, Aravis, and Hwin. We're going to not actually follow back up with Shasta, and who I am now pretty sure is his dad and his brother. I think that's actually going to wait till the last chapter.
Okay.
And this chapter is going to focus on these 3, and it's going to be, and this isn't like that cool of a thing because I think it's kind of obvious. This chapter is going to be about Bree really learning about the true Narnia. And all these things he's kind of held up might not be exactly what it's become, but he's going to love Narnia for what it really is.
Okay.
So that's my little theory for next chapter.
Well, on that note, something you said made me think, and I checked while you were talking, and I was completely wrong. So this is our first, or maybe second, mid-show addendum. The stuff with Shasta talking to the king comes after the Rabbadash part.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I saw that. I just didn't want to say it on the show. It was fine.
Yeah, I saw it too, but I did want to say something.
No, it's fine.
Yeah.
It's fine. It's fine. Yeah,
And take away our podcasting license.
It happens all the time, So before we go, though, as always, we have got an email, and I'm really excited for today's email. I have an email that Phil actually has not seen.
Oh.
And so I kind of hid it from you there in the inbox so you wouldn't see it, because I wanted to read it on the show, and I wanted you to hear it here first. So this is an email from Carl.
Carl with a K or a C?
Carl with a K, and his last name actually begins with a K too. But I'm gonna read the email first.
Okay.
Hello, Phil and Daniel. I wanted to let you know how much I enjoy your podcast. I started listening about 4 months ago, and I have been listening to one chapter per week. I very much appreciate the preparation, reverence, thought, and discussion from a Christian perspective that goes into each episode. The Chronicles of Narnia was a favorite book of mine growing up. My father, Paul, read it out loud many books in the series to me when I was young. I'm able to visit my father, who is a big fan of C.S. Lewis, on most weekends throughout the year. While listening to both of you talking about each chapter, I write down notes so that I can share with him your perspectives. I love the conversations I have with him in response to your podcast, where he is able to reflect upon the stories of Narnia that have brought him so much joy throughout his life. In addition, I love that the content we discuss often leads to spiritual conversations for both of us about our Christian faith. This weekend was made particularly special when you made a reference to the book that he wrote in 2007 titled Unlocking the Wardrobe by Paul Karkanen.
Whoa.
Well, I usually summarize the key points of your podcast to him. This weekend, I told him he had to listen to a particular section for himself. It was great to watch him hear his name read out loud and to hear his book being quoted, followed up by a deep and thoughtful discussion. In this particular episode, in Chapter 10 of Dawn Treader, Lucy is facing internal struggles when comforted with the temptations of the magician's book. Thank you so much for providing meaningful content and for making my father very happy, knowing that his writing is being read and discussed by fans of Narnia. Sincerely, Carl Karkanen.
Wow, that is fantastic. What a treat.
Isn't that cool?
Hi, Carl. Hi, Carl's dad.
His name is Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Yes, and I'm hoping the fact that Carl did not bring this up means that we have been saying Paul Karkanen's name correctly on the show for the last 3 seasons, because
I hope so too.
I love Unlocking the Wardrobe. It is a book that I think that was one of the ones I picked up during Dawn Treader, which is why I think it made on then. I don't think I mentioned it all this season just because I haven't been reading books for this season because I haven't read this book before. But I know it came up for Silver Chair as well too. So thank you so much to both Carl and Paul for listening to the show. Thank you to Paul for writing this wonderful book. And then what a crazy coincidence, right, that this shows up here. So that's really fun. And again, to all of our listeners, there are so many good resources on these books. Paul Karkanen is one of many, many wonderful and insightful authors who have just written a plethora of material on the Chronicles of Narnia. I mean, we've mentioned at least a dozen books at this point, and articles and newsletters that you can pick up. So if you ever want to go deeper besides just Phil and I goofing off over here talking about Star Wars and Marvel stuff, there are other ways as well as you could. I mean, we still want you to listen to the show. Don't get me wrong, but there's also many other great resources that I think can really help illuminate anyone else's experiences with these books.
Yeah, absolutely.
So yeah, that's our episode for today.
Man, that is so fun.
What a fun little thing. Yeah, I didn't want you to say. I thought it'd be fun to read that one on the show.
That's a great surprise.
Phil, do you want to go ahead and wrap us up here with our little end credits?
Sure.
And actually, we should say this before we do the Patreon thing, because it's near the end of the month, although I'm sure that you were hard at work and almost done with this, but because it is now the end of 2021, we are soon going to be sending out in the not too distant future, hopefully, the works of art that you have been creating for our top tier Patreon people.
Oh, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. I'm sure it's already completely done at this point.
Well, you can assume whatever you want.
So that those will go out sometime in early 2022. But yeah, Phil, last year, do you want to talk about a little bit what you did last year?
Yeah, last year I did a illustration of Tumnus at his abode with the fire going, surrounded by books and little trinkets on his mantelpiece.
Do you have any idea what you're planning on doing for this year?
I don't.
No.
But
it's fine. I'm just wondering. Yeah.
But I'm really excited to see what it is.
Yeah, so we've got a couple of patrons over at that very top tier that are going to be sent I think, how big was the thing you sent last time?
I think 11 by 14.
Yeah, it's a nice size poster because you gave us one, which is really nice, and we hung it up in our son's room because we have the Narnia nursery.
That's right.
So we've got, which is actually, this is really funny. So in that nursery, your wife has this painting or like a print, I guess, of Aslan where it says like "Courage, dear heart," and then my sister-in-law, who was an artist, actually painted like I think it's like a 20 by 20 canvas of Aslan. You've seen it. You've been in the room before.
Yeah.
And my son, also we have a little stuffed animal of a lion that we got. I mean, he's got a ton of stuffed animals now, but it was like the first one we put in the room.
Yeah.
And he's done this thing where he's learning his animal noises. And if you say like, what sound does a lion make? He goes, rah. Yeah. But he does this even goofier thing, which is that he'll stand in his room and the two paintings of Aslan are on like opposite walls. And then the lion will be in the middle, the stuffed animal, and he'll look at one and go, rah, and then point to the other one and go, rah, and then point to the other one and go, rah.
Wow, a lot
and
of
he
lions.
just goes in a circle. He'll do it for like 3 minutes.
Whoa.
It's the weirdest thing to watch. He'll just kind of spin in circles pointing at the lion and just saying roar over and over again. It's really funny.
He's in his own lion den. That's great.
So he's a big fan of Narnia, although he has only read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe so far.
Yeah,
and by
or listen to it.
He listened to it at about 3 months old, so Yeah.
Get him started early. That's what
you
we
have
always
to
say.
do. So, all right. Well, I'll let you finish the episode now.
Yeah. Well, speaking of Patreon, this episode is made possible by our patrons. If you'd like to support the show, you can listen to a bonus episode each month along with other rewards. Special thanks goes to Elias Dean, Hannah Anderson, John Marr, Emily Wakefield, and Ryan Smith for supporting us at our top tiers. Listener feedback can be sent to thenarniapodcast@gmail.com, or if you want to leave a voicemail at 406-646-6733. A review on Apple Podcast or other podcasting apps will help other listeners find our show and join our read-through. Thank you for coming along on this journey, and we will be back next time with Chapter 14.